Wisdom, the final frontier to true knowledge. Welcome to Wisdom Trek, where our mission is to create a legacy of wisdom, to seek out discernment and insights, to boldly grow where few have chosen to grow before. Hello, my friend. I am Guthrie Chamberlain, your captain on our journey to increase wisdom and create a living legacy. Thank you for joining us today as we explore wisdom on our second millennium podcast. This is day 1301 of our trek and time for Worldview Wednesday. Creating a biblical worldview is important in order to have a proper perspective on today's current events. To establish a biblical worldview, it is required that we also have a proper understanding of God and His Word. Our focus for the next several months on Worldview Wednesday is mastering the Bible through a series of brief insights. These insights are extracted from a book by the same title from one of today's most prominent Hebrew scholars, Dr. Micheal S. Heiser. This book is a collection of insights designed to help you to understand the Bible better. When we let the Bible be what it is, we can understand it as the original readers did and as the original writers intended. Each week we'll explore 2 additional insights. So today we're going to look at mastering the Bible and discuss holy ground and sacrifices. So insight number 29. Biblical writers took the concept of holy ground very seriously. To the ancient Israelite, the world was a perilous place. Not only did most people live a subsistent lifestyle, where daily bread was a little concern, but they were also surrounded by hostile supernatural forces. God's choice of Israel was a blessing, but it came on the heels of a terrible judgment at the Tower of Babel, where all the other nations were allotted to the dominion of lesser gods, as we looked at in Deuteronomy chapter 32, verses 8 and 9. And you can find this in a previous week's episode. At that point, Israel was alone against the world. This worldview operated in tandem with an idea fundamental to biblical theology, the holiness of God. Last week we discussed how if something was set aside for God, it was considered holy. Therefore, the things associated with Him were holy or had to be made holy. Wherever the presence of God was found, the place was, by definition, holy ground. The most obvious example is the territory encompassed by the tabernacle and, later, the temple. Only priests, people who had to be made holy, that is, set apart or sanctified by ritual acts, were allowed on that holy ground. The concept was actually broader, though. While the Israelites journeyed to the Promised Land, holy ground was also equated with the entire camp of Israel, since the ark was located within the Holy of Holies, which was at the center of the camp. And this can be found in Numbers chapter 2 and 3. That is why, in the Day of Atonement ceremony, the goat that bore the sins of the nation was driven out of the camp, Leviticus chapter 16. Sin had no place on the holy ground. Once the Israelites settled in the Promised Land, God's domain, the entire land was considered holy ground. Everywhere outside of Israel was unholy. Some odd episodes in the Old Testament are understandable only in light of this worldview. In 2 Kings chapter 5, we read a story about Naaman, the Syrian captain who had leprosy. Once miraculously healed, Naaman asked the prophet Elisha if he could load his mule with dirt and take it home with him. This request seems ridiculous, but it isn't. Naaman recognized that the Yahweh of Israel was the true God, so Naaman wanted to take some holy ground back with him to Syria, which was ruled by another god, Rimmon. This is found in 2 Kings chapter 5, verses 15 through 18. Let me read this to you. Then Naaman and his entire party went back to find the man of God. They stood before him, and Naaman said, "Now I know that there is no other God in all the world except in Israel. So please accept this gift from your servant." But Elisha replied, "As surely as the Lord lives, whom I serve, I will not accept any gifts." And though Naaman urged him to take the gift, Elisha refused. Then Naaman said, "But please allow me to load 2 of my mules with earth from this place. I will take it back home with me. From now on, I will never again offer burnt offerings or sacrifices to any other god except the Lord. However, may the Lord pardon me in this one thing. When my master the king goes to the temple of the god of Rimmon to worship there and leans on my arm, may the Lord pardon me when I bow too." Similarly, when David was driven out of the Israelite territory, he complains that he had been told to worship other gods, 2 Samuel chapter 26. We might wonder why David would care. Didn't he realize he could worship God everywhere? Well, he actually didn't. The tabernacle and the priesthood were in Israel, which was holy ground, and David at that time was not. This conceptual framework is significant in New Testament theology. The presence of God no longer lives in the temple or any one place. Instead, the presence dwells within each believer. We are the temple of God, individually and corporately. We are holy ground, and we ought to take this concept as seriously as the biblical people did in the Old Testament. Let's move on to the next insight, insight number 30. Old Testament sacrifices weren't primarily about individual forgiveness for sin. The sacrificial system of the Old Testament isn't easy to understand. Not only is the system convoluted and complex, but statements about the purpose seems to contradict one another. On one hand, Hebrews chapter 10 verse 4 asserts, "For it is not possible for the blood of bulls and goats to take away sin." On the other hand, one of the results of the various sacrifices in the book of Leviticus is that the persons or nation will be forgiven. The problem of this apparent inconsistency is a matter of both terminology and taking a more careful look at the Old Testament sacrifices. There are indeed certain passages where sacrifices do indeed result in being forgiven, but exactly what that means requires explanation. Most of the time, however, blood sacrifices has nothing to do with addressing individual sins. The burnt, grain, and peace offerings in Leviticus chapter 1 through 3 were basically gifts to God. They were positive responses to the fellowship relationship between the one bringing the offering and the Lord. They were offered to enhance the well-being of the relationship, not to earn salvation. And so, the so-called sin offering in Leviticus chapter 4 and 5 and the guilt offering in Leviticus chapter 5 through 7 are less comprehensible to us. Part of the problem is that the translated English names of these offerings are misleading. They are better to be understood as the purification offering and the reparation offering. The blood of these offerings were never applied to the one bringing the offering, so there is no sense that the worshiper is being cleansed from sin. The blood was only used to purify the sanctuary and its furniture. These offerings were designed to purge the sanctuary and its accoutrements from ritual defilement to maintain the sanctity of the sacred space. It is crucial to grasp the biblical meaning of the Hebrew term translated atone or take away, kippur, and forgive, the Hebrew term sodolikli. Contrary to popular teaching, the first term does not mean to cover. Rather, kippur means to purge or wipe clean with respect to the defilement of the sanctuary. This makes sense given the use of the blood in the offerings noted above. The second term is better translated become clean or be purified. This again makes sense since the blood was applied to the sanctuary. This helps us to understand passages that speak of a person being forgiven. These blood sacrifices purge or purified the sanctuary from defilement that could be brought to it by people who either committed moral offense, that is to sin, or who inadvertently, as opposed to defiantly, became unclean and were no longer holy. People were forgiven in the sense that they would no longer bring contamination into the sacred space. There was no sacrifice in the Old Testament for defiant sin. The blood sacrifice, therefore, meant that the one making the offering no longer threatened the sacred space. While the contaminating effect of inadvertent sin was dealt with, sacrifices didn't offer the same permanent forgiveness and removal of sin that Jesus does. And that will conclude our lesson for this week on another 2 insights from Dr. Heiser's book, Mastering the Bible. Next Worldview Wednesday, we will continue with 2 additional insights. I believe that you'll find each Worldview Wednesday an interesting topic to consider as we build our biblical worldview. Tomorrow we will continue with our 3-minute humor nugget that will provide you with a bit of cheer that will help you to lighten up and live a rich and satisfying life. So encourage your friends and family to join us and to come along with us tomorrow for another day of Wisdom Trek, Creating a Legacy. If you'd like to listen to any of the past 1,300 treks or read the Wisdom Journals, they are all available at wisdom-trek.com. And I encourage you to subscribe to Wisdom Trek on your favorite podcast player so that each day's trek will be downloaded to you automatically. And thank you so much for allowing me to be your guide, your mentor, but most importantly, I am your friend as I serve you through the Wisdom Trek podcast and journal each day. And as we take this trek of life together, let us always live abundantly, love unconditionally, listen intentionally, learn continuously, lend to others generously, lead with integrity, and then leave a living legacy each day. I am Guthrie Chamberlain, reminding you to keep moving forward, enjoy your journey, and then create a great day every day. See you tomorrow.